Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us into this very last session of this first Info Day of Horizon Europe for the Health Cluster. Last but not least session, this we hope is going to be very informative for you. Possibly you are gonna, and it's about, again, clinical studies and about the essential information template that we have put together. You're going to think probably, oh my God, they have come up with another template, another form. But actually, this is an object that we have put together to support you and to better show and structure your application, especially, specifically if it contains clinical studies that are a very complex endeavor. So please immediately use Slido, take advantage of this great communication tool. We are gonna see now, you can see how to connect and use it. We are gonna use it for two purposes. We are gonna use it for a poll to understand a little better who you are out there. I hope many of you have endured the long day, but they are still connected. And then, of course, we are going to use Slido for incoming questions. As I say, if we can have, I'm just going to give you a short introduction of what we are going to look at today. So we are going to look at the template, addressing all the questions related to the template that you can send us via Slido. I would like to remind you a very important thing. There was a pre-recorded session talking about the template prepared by my colleague Laszlo Hemle, who is here, who you soon see here in video. My name is Monica Insini. Sorry, I forgot to tell you, but I think it appeared down there. So he recorded this presentation. This is a great support. You can look back and use it for finding all the details about the template. And then you can also find the template itself in the document library of this session. We can go for the second slide. Okay, then the second slide, please. So exactly. So I told you already to use Slido. I'm sure that you're super proficient at this point, a pro. But what we would like to have an idea of is if you have actually looked at the pre-recorded material. So to do that, we are going to launch a poll with Slido now to see if you have actually looked at the material. So please answer the questions. So we are asking you, have you watched the pre-recorded presentation for this current session? Don't be shy, but mainly tell the truth, because this is very important in the sense that Laszlo will tune his presentation according to your knowledge of the background that we are going to talk about today. So it looks like it's not too, it's actually, yeah, it's okay. But certainly, I think you will enjoy Laszlo's presentation, because it's quite clear that possibly you didn't have the opportunity to see this pre-recorded material. So now we look at the second poll, where we want to ask you, are you familiar with the clinical study template that we are going to talk about? Okay, again, it's an interesting start where possibly you admit that you are not very familiar with the object, which, okay, again, this is going to be very informative for us because Laszlo can then really take the time that we have reserved to go through all the different points. This template has been developed in a transversal way. A lot of colleagues have contributed. We have taken advantage of what we have learned during the use of this template in Horizon 2020. During Horizon 2020, it's been already used extensively. We have made a better version of it, looking at the experience that we have gathered with the previous program. And again, the reason of la raison d'être of this template is to give you an instrument to show how robust your research is, how prepared you are for clinical research applications to apply for funding for clinical research, and give you a better opportunity to emerge during very competitive calls. So please consider this as a support and not a further burden for you. I think that possibly we can now go straight into the heart of the matter and have Laszlo presenting the template for you and going through all the focal point. Please, Laszlo.
Thank you very much, Monica. I also would like to personally welcome you and congratulate you that you are still with us at this late hour. And I can imagine how tiresome it might have been for some of you who started early in the morning with the first session. So please bear with us with a little more, and then we are going to go through the presentation, which I prepared as a fallback scenario, seeing now that a good portion of you have not really had the time to look into either the pre-recorded presentation or the template itself. So I think it's good that that we are going to go through the various sections of this clinical study template, so that while we are introducing the elements against which we would like to receive information from the applicants who would like to pursue clinical study activities throughout the project that is funded by grants in cluster health, then you will have the time to think about potential questions to raise, and then you will be able to hopefully clarify certain points that are not 100% clear about what information should go where. And before I jump into the first slide, I would like to let you know that whatever is said during this session is not legally binding. This is a very important disclaimer. All the official documents, the legal texts are available for you, and all the guidance documents on the Funding and Tenders Opportunity Portal. I really encourage you to dedicate some time and search in this portal. A wealth of information you will find there. It has many functions, but I will not go over that right now. Rather, I will start the presentation about the clinical study template. So just to give you a little bit of background, in addition to what Monica has already said during her nice introduction, is that we've started to use a template already under Horizon 2020, and it was restructured in a way that we wanted to put in balance the information about the scientific excellence behind the clinical studies and also the operational feasibility. So we wanted to have as much detail about the operational part, how the consortium, the sponsor of the planned clinical study, is preparing for the execution of the clinical study. And also very important to learn about the scientific nature of the planned clinical studies. So we believe that it's really appropriate to ask such an early stage of the application process all the details, because we know that many of these details are not carved in stone at the proposal stage or when the application is submitted. But at least we would like to guide the applicants that they take into account many very important aspects of the planning phase. And through this, we are not only giving some guidance to the applicants what to prepare for, but we also serve another intertwined objective that the evaluators, the expert evaluators who are marking the proposals and giving scores, have a very structured set of information that describes the clinical study, especially its robustness and how feasible it is to carry out. And just to highlight that clinical studies are rather complex endeavors, and I think everyone understands this. But the challenges are pretty well known. So most of the hurdles, most of the difficulties that one encounters during the planning and implementation phase of various clinical studies are pretty well known. So there are no big surprises. And with adequate planning and securing the right resources, the right people behind the project and the necessary intelligence is available to the consortia, much of these challenges could be easily overcome. Now, moving to the definition of the clinical study, it is very important to highlight that this is one template for all kinds of clinical studies. And unfortunately, there is no definition out there in the scientific community or in the regulatory framework that would include all the types of activities that we would like to cover with this template. So we developed our own definition, which is an all-encompassing approach. And basically, we would request that applicants fill in this template for all the activities that are related to addressing scientific questions about health, whether this is understanding, prevention, diagnosis, monitoring, or treatment of a disease, mental illness, or physical condition. And when they address these scientific questions, they need to collect health data that are linked to individuals, patients or healthy volunteers. And we don't differentiate between prospective data collection or retrospective data analysis. So everything under the scope, it's really, we could not think much that would not fall underneath this definition. And in the bottom slide, portion of the slide, you can see that there are very clear definitions in legal texts that are related to medicinal products if one would like to pursue clinical study. This, you see the reference on the slide. Or there are very also clear definitions regarding medical devices, and also in vitro diagnostic medical devices, but we go beyond this. So any types of interventions, for example, health counseling or other type of interventions that are not medicinal products, not medical devices, not in vitro diagnostic medical devices, we ask that this template is taken into account and information is provided against the various sections that I'm now going to show you. There are three main parts of this template. And each of these parts have a similar number of subsections. As you can see, it's anywhere from 10 or 11 subsections. The first main part is about describing the clinical study. The second big part is about preparedness status. And the third part is about operational feasibility. So in the first main part, which is describing the clinical study, we would like to have some kind of identification of this clinical study. And yes, most of the time, a unique identifier will not be available. But I would just like to highlight that even if there is just very high level basic idea, high level concept, what is going to be investigated, what will be the clinical study protocol about, it's already possible to get a UDRA-CT number. This is for medicinal products. So even with very limited information, one can request a unique identifier if it's a clinical study with medicines. The same applies for ISCRTN. There, it's really a registry where all kinds of clinical studies can be registered. Non-interventional, prospective, retrospective, all kinds of interventions. And again, here the same notion applies. One can request a unique identifier even with very limited set of information. So this is just to let you know that this is a possibility. Now moving to the next subsection, the study rationale. Here we would like you to describe why you are going to do the clinical study. What are the major reasons that you believe that this is the right methodology to get the answer to some of your scientific questions? And there are two subsections of this study rationale. We'd like you to make some efforts to briefly and concisely describe what is the current knowledge, which is linked directly to the scientific questions that you would like to be answered by the clinical study. And then we would also like to know even one more layer down the road, what the outcomes of the current, so the current knowledge is based on previous studies and what the exact outcomes of these previous studies were. And we encourage you to really look into these public registries, make a search, and the closer the design and the type of clinical questions is to your own proposal is the better, because then you really target very similar prior endeavors that try to address similar questions, but we need to know what the outcomes of these studies were. And then another important element is what is the current level of evidence that we know how the particular intervention works in the human body. So mechanism of action in a broad sense, we would like you to describe what is the current understanding about that. Continuing on the description of the clinical study, it's very obvious that we would like you to detail the concrete objectives of the clinical study, touching upon the primary and if you have secondary objectives. Then moving on to the characterization of the study population, we'd like some details about the size of the study population, what is the age group that you are targeting, sex distribution, inclusion and exclusion criteria. So it's very important, how relevant the collected information will be to how the generalizability of the clinical study will be. And for all these items, when you are describing the study population, for each of them, we really like to see some justifications. And it doesn't need to be very detailed, but if you have figured out already what the characteristics of the study population are, then you really need to think about it. Why I include this type of subjects, or patients, healthy volunteers, and why I would like to exclude the ones with certain parameters. So justification is very important here. And then the last point on this slide is about the sample size and the power calculation. Maybe it's not mature enough at the time of proposal, and then perhaps I should have started the presentation with mentioning that obviously when some of the points are not relevant for your clinical study, or at that time you have just no information about this, you can state this. We don't want any of the sections left blank. So just please say this is not relevant, not known at this stage. This is also very informative for us and for the experts who are going to evaluate. Now, the last part of the description of the clinical study is about the design of the clinical study, whether it's controlled, uncontrolled, randomized, open or blinded, parallel group crossover, or other type of designs. These are just some examples so that you understand what we mean by design of the clinical study. And again, here, justification of the selection of the design is rather important. Then the next subsection is about the type of intervention. This is pretty straightforward. We just like to know what you are going to use as an intervention, whether it's a medicinal product, an advanced therapy medicinal product, a medical device, or it could be a surgical or other type of invasive procedures, other medical interventions. But we need to be very clear what you are going to use as an intervention, because this is primarily defines what the regulatory framework will be that you need to take into account. And the last point on this slide is about the description and timing of study procedures. This should be a tabulated overview of what the actual patients or healthy volunteers will need to go through while they are taking part in the clinical study. So we need to know how burdensome for them the procedures will be, how frequently they need to visit clinics, or whether data collection will be done from remote. All these aspects are very important, and we'd like you to give ample details about the study procedures. And now moving to the next main section, which is about the preparedness status. We'd like to have some idea about the development of the study protocol, how the actual version of the clinical study protocol that you might have at hand has been formulated. But if it is not available yet, since still these questions will be guiding you what would be highly relevant in terms of drawing up an excellent clinical study protocol. So even if you have not done this, for example, you are planning to ask for scientific advice from regulatory or health technology assessment bodies, you should list all the activities that you are planning that will support you in drawing up a state-of-the-art clinical study protocol. And this is the same for clinical efficacy, safety, and methodological guidelines that you would like to consult in drawing up your protocol. And we also like to learn whether you intend to involve citizens, patients, carers, and all the important stakeholders who might be affected by the outcome, actually, of the clinical studies, and how their views are taken into account when you design your scientific endeavor. Still continuing in the preparedness status, in the current changing regulatory framework, and I'm pretty sure many of you are aware that soon, from early next year, we hope that the clinical trial regulation, which deals with clinical trials with medicinal products, will be applied. and it presents a different regulatory framework than what is currently active. And the same goes with medical devices. The medical device regulation has just been applied since May, and it is really a rather complex matter to prepare an application where it's applicable to regulatory approvals and ethics approvals with medical devices. So we strongly encourage that anyone who would like to plan clinical studies that are highly regulated, they ensure that they have available of the right regulatory intelligence, either within the consortium or in other ways. They just secure that there will be people with the right expertise who can advise on how to approach these regulatory issues. And it's very relevant, or it's even more important if the clinical study is planned in more than one countries, because the diversity of the requirements from member state to member states, from different parts, are still there. So I think this is really about this slide. I move on to the next one. And this is the last part of the preparedness status. Regarding the scientific and operational governance of the clinical study, it's important to know who the sponsor is and what type of entity the sponsor is, where is it located. It also has consequences regarding the regulatory aspects. And beyond knowing about the sponsor, we'd like to have an idea how the overall governance of the clinical study will be managed by the consortium. So this is not the governance of the entire project, but the governance of the clinical study. What boards are planned to be in place, and how the overall management of the clinical study will be done from a scientific and from an operational perspective. Now moving to the last part of the clinical study template, it's about operational feasibility. And sometimes it is really a challenge to secure the availability of the interventions throughout the entire life cycle of the clinical study. So ample attention must be paid to make all the efforts that the studies do not need to be put on hold because an abruption in the supply of the interventions that are being studied. So we'd like to ask for all the plans that the consortium would like to have in place in order to secure all these aspects. Regarding the study population, we've talked about the description of what this study population will be, its characteristics, but then will there be enough time to recruit all the number of subjects, patients or healthy volunteers whom we need in order to draw meaningful scientific conclusions by the end of the study? So the recruitment strategy is key, and we'd like to have ample details that is described under this section. Now moving on, clinical sites play obviously a key role in recruiting the study population. And we would like to have an understanding what the distribution of these clinical sites will be. Are they, for example, part of an established clinical network, or they will be selected against certain criteria? These criteria would be also very important to know. And yes, it's important to see, what the distribution of the entire study population will be amongst these clinical sites. Will there be so-called competition between the clinical sites, and if there are some difficulties with one site to recruit the allocated number of subjects, patients or healthy volunteers, how the underperformance by the consortium will be dealt with. And very important is to really base the calculation of the recruitment of the study population on prior experience. So if these clinical sites have taken part in similar studies, meaning similar patient populations with similar burdens that they have to endure throughout the study, they should really present their prior experience, in what time frame, how many people they could recruit. And now I see that I need to speed up a bit, so I will finish pretty soon. There are just 2 more slides. The additional supply, if it's needed to carry out study-specific procedures throughout the clinical study, we also like to know how the consortium will make sure that there will be no disruption of the continuous supply of these additional important elements. And then under 3.4, we'd like to have some details about data management aspects. And next, regarding reporting obligations, which at certain times can be quite time-consuming and very complex, we would like to understand how the overall management will ensure that all the obligations are met, and all the reports are published or delivered to the entities that must receive these reports. And now this is my last slide. Obviously, in some times, the sponsors cannot themselves take or carry out all the responsibilities that must be done during the execution of the clinical study. But if some of these responsibilities are outsourced, we would like to understand what these are and how the general oversight is going to be ensured by the management. And then finally, I finish up with the major study milestones, which must be drawn up against a realistic plan. And the items that we would like to see is how much time the consortium will need in order to compile the required regulatory and ethics submission package, when they expect to receive regulatory and ethics approval, when the initiation of the clinical sites will happen, when is the time when the recruitment should close, and then when the final assessment of all the study participants will be accomplished. And then we also need to know the timelines when the analysis is done, reporting is ready, and it's published in public registries. So with this, I would like to thank you for your kind attention. Maybe it was a bit longer, but then I quickly ask Monica to come on board and shoot the questions that we have time to answer.
Thank you very much, Laszlo, because this was really good. Thank you very much. You, of course, appreciate how complex the whole thing is, of course. Here you are still in this late afternoon, but thank you actually for sending up a lot of very good questions that we will start answering. There are many of them. Most likely we are not going to answer all of them, but we will keep them. We will then answer them anyway, probably via the funding and tenders opportunities portal. And the frequently asked questions, so you can always reach out to us if you have still questions. So let's answer to the first one that is on top now in this moment, and it's a very simple one that needs to be cleared out, and it's in a single stage call. The clinical studies template must be included in Part B or of the proposal or attached as separate annex.
Thank you, Monica, for the question. Yes, there is an instruction in the clinical study template at the beginning that the use of the template itself is mandatory for certain core topics. It's identified in the template itself. And if the topic is a two-stage topic, in the first stage, the clinical, the study template should not be uploaded. It will actually not be available as a document for the applicants. And yes, the description of the clinical study should go in Part B of the general application form.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. And another question that I think it would be really good to answer immediately to clear the air is the clinical study template pages count within the 45 pages allowed for the proposal? The answer is no, but I let Laszlo to elaborate.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, it's a clear answer. And again, if you look into the template, the introductory part of the template, you will see a clear answer to this question, that there is no page limitation for the template itself. We ask applicants to be as concise as possible, but detailed enough so that the evaluators understand the full picture. And it does not count in the 45-page limit of the general application form. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Laszlo. I think this was really important to make sure it was clear. Indeed, the template is exactly a support for you to be able to add a lot of more information that would not fit in the 45 pages. Another question coming up, do we need to have approvals for local IRBs before submission?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's good. It's a very good sign if you already gathered such an ethics clearance, because then we can make sure that this hurdle is already overcome. So you are in a very good status. But at any early stage of an idea, you can apply for funding, and then you will describe in the clinical study template what you have at hand at that time. But then you have all the opportunities to describe what you are planning to do in terms of drawing up the clinical study protocol, as well as how you are going to execute the clinical study once you are at that stage. So again, the template is very relevant at all stages of your scientific idea being formulated into a clinical study. Please fill in all the sections. And I have to give you this information, which is very important. It is mandatory. So if you would like to have funds for a project that will implement clinical studies and you don't submit the clinical study template, it will have a serious consequence on the scoring of the proposal.
Yes, this is indeed a very important thing that you need to keep in mind. This template is absolutely your best friend if you are planning to apply for funding for clinical studies. We have another question. In single stage calls, the clinical studies template must be included in Part B of the proposal or attached as a separate annex.
I think I will just answer shortly. Yes, as a separate annex. And let's take the next question.
I'm sorry, I saw one that I think it's interesting. It was about the deliverables. I am not seeing it anymore. But so let's answer the one that got nine likes. It's what about scientific or ethic advisory boards that could support the quality of a clinical study? Should letters of support be uploaded?
We would ask the applicants to integrate this information into the relevant section of the clinical study template. We do not ask at that stage these support letters to be submitted as additional annexes. The best that you can do is to integrate this information into the relevant sections, because the expert evaluators will look at these structured information and they will draw conclusions about the scoring of the overall excellence and efficiency of implementation for the clinical study part based on the template.
Thank you, Laszlo. Again, one that has quite a bit of likes, and I think so then the audience is interested in it, and it's how to handle multicentric clinical trials in the template. If studies are similar between places, is it considered as one clinical trial or different?
If the clinical study protocol, which defines all the activities that will be carried out throughout the clinical study, is identical, unless there are only very slight site-specific deviations, then it can be regarded as one clinical study. In all other cases, if there are major differences between the clinical studies, I would advise that you handle them separately. I would say that the best practice would be if you combine the data, that you draw this plan into one single clinical study protocol and try to handle the minor differences within that one document.
Thank you, Laszlo. I just wanted to highlight the fact that in theory, we have only 3 minutes left for the session. We can go on for 5 more minutes. It's later now in the afternoon, but we can try to answer a few questions. So we are going to stay a few minutes longer. And as I said, the questions will be saved and we will be able to answer them later on. So there is a question that I think it's interesting, and it's about the unique identifier. So it reads, so you recommend applicants that they should register their study even they might not start them should the proposal not be ranked, funded?
Well, you need to take into account that some of the in some registries this is a fee for service. There's a fee for service, so it's up to you if you would like to invest upfront into that part. But for medicinal products, this is free of charge. And if you are planning a clinical study to do with a medicinal product, then you can obtain this unique identifier with very, very limited information. And I would advise that you do this.
So another one, which I think is quite interesting, if a CT is not the main part of the proposal, but will be conducted at later stage, applicants will develop the CT plan just during the project. What do you recommend?
Again, I would recommend, and this is, you have to actually use the template. If you request funding for a clinical study that will be developed during the project, you must have some basic ideas why you will include this clinical study in the project. And then you described what is known at that stage, and then you kind of commit to what you are going to do during the project in order to address all the other bullet points, because this is highly relevant. We need to know how you think about planning such activities and how you will be prepared at the time to execute the clinical study. So yes, please address all the points, even in these circumstances, because we at least know how you are going to tackle actually these issues while you are doing the planning and the execution.
Thank you, Laszlo. A few more minutes. I guess we can go for 5 more minutes. Is there a preferred way to include study centers in the project as beneficiaries, difficult if many studies sites, or subcontractor?
This is one of the issues that I would not like to address during this session, because this goes beyond my expertise. We have a whole group of legal and financial experts who know the ins and outs of who can be a beneficiary and how to bring them on board even during the project implementation. So I would not like to give you half correct answers. So we will come back to you. We will save all these questions, and then you can see this as a follow-up.
I can add that possibly this can also be defined during GAP preparation, grant agreement preparation, depending on the situation. But okay, great. Thank you, Laszlo. A next question that is coming up, is it necessarily to fill the clinical study template for administering, I think, population health data use?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I can fully capture what is being asked here. So maybe we can go to the next one, and then we try to figure out and give answer in writing.
Okay, sorry. So let's take the other one. Then the next one is that, is it possible to make amendments to the clinical study submitted in the proposal during the project implementation?
Absolutely. I mean, and this is, in almost all the cases, this is almost unavoidable. So it will happen in many cases, but for the application process, we need to know what you have in your mind, and then obviously this will not prevent you later down the implementation of the clinical study that you change. You need to amend the clinical study protocol, you need to bring in more sites, whatever the issue will be. This is absolutely possible.
Thank you, Laszlo. I think we can take the one probably just after. Is it possible to use unit costs for patients? They could be declared in a table in Chapter 3 as other costs like internal invoicing. Or this is probably still very budgetarian-like, so we probably move to the other one. That is, do low intervention clinical studies still need to fill in the whole template?
Monica, the first question is one of the exceptions that I would like to take. So you're right that this is really a very detailed financial type of information, but I can give you a very firm answer that no. The unit cost per patient concept was used in Horizon 2020, but this is not applied in Horizon Europe under cluster health. So this is not an option anymore. So I take the next one, which was do low intervention clinical studies still need to fill in the whole template? Yes, please, for any kind of clinical studies, fill in the entire template. And we understand that many of the sections for a non-interventional study will not be relevant, but please state so.
Thank you very much. I think we have run out of time. I think we can probably, if Laszlo agrees, we can probably wrap it up. Again, we will keep all the questions and answer them. on different channels. I would like to thank Laszlo very much indeed. This, I think, and I hope you perceived and you appreciated how hopefully informative it was, and we hope to have given you very good tips and answers to make the best use of this template. I let Laszlo close with few remarks for you to take home message of this session. Please, Laszlo.
Thank you very much, Monica, and really I appreciate your kind moderation and the way you juggled between on front and in the back, doing the Slido validations and all sorts of things. So thank you so much. I think you did a great job, and I thank the audience that they stayed with us at such a late hour. And let's keep in touch. You have all the opportunities to ask questions through the various channels, and then we will come back to you with all the answers to the questions that we did not have time to address at this session. I wish you a nice weekend, and again, thanks for being us during this session. Bye now.
Yes, thank you very much to everybody. I think I'm probably you have your mic on, Laszlo. Thank you. Have a great weekend, and good luck everybody for applying for these upcoming calls for Horizon Europe. Thank you.